Perhaps his dreams were a ladder leading to uselessness. Perhaps my dreams are the same.
Well, I thought this was going to immediately go to the next chapter. It didn't. Hello! And welcome back to the old city, Leviathan. So we're in the previous chapter with just a little bit more to read. Page 598. We know it's much longer than that. Minotaur, what we are. The Minotaurs were elected as moderators in the discussion between the three ideological groups of the council. Their usefulness is directly related to their ability to maintain fairness. Instrumental in preventing violent outbreaks and infighting, the Minotaurs do not align with any particular ideology. They act as free agents in a discussion between three established factions. A major source of support of the Minotaurs is another party named Leviathan, I'm assuming, in the old city, which is now quarantined because of... So I'm assuming that they needed constant mental care because they were dealing with fighting all the time. One small step for a man, another useless corpse for mankind. Oh dear Lord. So dark. Deliciously so. Their dream.
How much do you know of the old world? Did you even exist?
Whoa.
Were you thrown overboard when your fall occurred, floundering in a new and terrifying negativity? My transition was not a comfortable one, so in this we can feel a measure of companionship.
There's the shoal. That's what he was drinking from. That may very well be ocean water for all we know. Is it that simple? He was drinking ocean water? A lot of salt will make you go crazy, that's for sure. But anyways, in the last level, we found Solomon's Notes, the fourth one. We only have 3 more to go. So how long is this one? This is why I wasn't... Oh, dear God. Yeah, this is why I didn't read it during the last one and didn't go into that room and then find that I could, ended that a little bit later. But yeah, whatever. I like to have things nice and put together, but that's not how Let's Plays are. You can't really plan them out if it's blind. It's my first playthrough. I would have no idea. But anyways, Note 7, 30th of January. I can't say that isolation is without its benefits. Even in times such as now, where the transition makes the negative aspects painfully apparent, I can and should note that this natural pessimism is simply a product of the turmoil afforded by transition in general. Pessimism affords functions this way, or rather often functions this way. Chaos or turmoil have the odd ability to color things colorless, and even the most black reality is better than a gray one. Ah, the vagueness of it, though. I can do nothing but apologize for my silly semantics. My only point is that the transition between being slightly less alone to the normalcy of total isolation is where blind negativity is in full force, and the positive nature of loneliness is difficult to see when your entire universe crumbles in light of your own recent and unfortunate experience. After the shades are lifted and we see the universe in all of its true scale, our own experience is appropriately marginalized. I do recognize it, the interim of transition, as a sort of selfish thing. Much like you are now, I am sure my writing has been summarily dismissed as angsty gibberish, the kind of hollow passion you often see around people transitioning into adulthood at the moment where children wake to the sad truth that everything is not only terrible, but much, much worse. It's all pointless. I can't really blame you, though I'm not sure why you've kept reading to this point. You should see by now that there really is nothing to be gained from this. Anyway, as I was saying, the transition is to blame for the pessimism. The benefits are still present, however, and they are vast. Macro perspectives tend to be accurate by nature of being distant, and isolation provides a wellspring of distance. After all, how could one be nearsighted when there is nothing near to see? Bias always exists, of course, but when one is alone, the bias only presents a conflict of interpretation, not of scope. That is to say, the bias of an isolated individual is an internal issue that follows the same rules of insecurity and selfishness that a more involved or social bias does without the lack of context created by blinders. Looking at the world through a telescope allows one to see all and consequently interpret the total object of the findings. Existing in said world can cause problems of perspective that an attached individual rarely experiences. Of course, it's also possible, likely, yes, that the position has been assumed by yours truly for the sake of justifying my own misanthropy. But, as you well know, I've never been one for baseless psychoanalysis. Then again, that might simply be because I am wholly terrible at it. Look at me. I am psychoanalyzing my own failure to psychoanalyze. This is what people like you do to me. You and your ceaseless assumption of some internal struggle, warping every position I could ever take that happens to not agree with your own. Could it be possible, perhaps even probable, that you are wrong about something? Anything? Yes, reader. I am now sure that this is the chief benefit of isolation. Never speaking to anyone like you. Still, here you are haunting my thoughts with your idiocy. If only I wasn't so similarly stupid that we wouldn't have to continue playing this game. We do make a pathetic pair, don't we? Oh, but we aren't the only ones, you know? He was a curious man. Completely insane, granted, but curious in a charming sort of way. I met him yesterday near the Northwestern Water Treatment Facility. Jonah, he called himself. It's a quaint title for an enigmatic man. I was making my way back towards the great retaining walls from the western beaches when the road widened to what was once called a highway. I could see him through the fog, but what terrified me was that I could hear him as well. Do you know the difference between terror and horror? Horror is a response to realized dread, but terror is something else entirely. Terror is an unknown chasm between safety and danger that simultaneously causes us to hide away while driving curiosity. We want to know the nature of the danger, even if we aren't sure that it exists. When I heard him speaking, my immediate reaction was to assume he was calling to me, but that assumption faded as I paid attention to his tone. It seemed as though he was conversing with someone, which caused me to assume that he was not alone. You should know by now that I am a coward, so it should be no surprise that I jumped to the weighted... Let me start over there, sorry. Surprised that I jumped to and waited behind a large stone just to the side of the road before he could see me. As he got closer, I could see that there was no one else. In my confusion and curiosity, I'm not doing well today, am I? I seemed to have presented just enough of my head for him to see that I was present. Wow! He wasn't startled by me, rather he just said a bizarre string of words. Today, my dyslexia is definitely falling through, isn't it? I really can't seem to have a good day, can I? Good morn, fellow sailor. Yes, at that moment I understood. He was not talking to anyone particular. He's simply insane. I physically transitioned from cowardice to caution, then slowly approached. He had this absurd smile on his face, yet his eyes were static and his brow was relaxed. I couldn't decide if the expression was disingenuous or simply indicative of a complete mental emptiness. Regardless, I felt it at least safe enough to mutter my greeting. Hello. Not quite as fancy as his, but at least it was grounded in reality. Anyway, he pointed west in the direction of the cliffs, to a small outcropping amidst the pines. I could see a large bench with a wooden roof looking out at the sea. The sun was just setting, almost spotlighting the area. Care for a chat? You look tired, he said, almost as tired as I am. And what better way to rest a bit than to watch the sun set over Shoal? Let loose your anchor for a while. It's been ages since I've spoken to anyone new. I paused for a moment to consider the danger of the situation. But then I noticed his lack of weaponry and how he could have attacked me long before. Additionally, and I won't lie, I was curious. The way he spoke was bizarre in an almost pretentious way, but it was interesting, so I agreed. We sat on either end, and I wanted to keep my distance so there was enough space between us for two people to join. At first, I was so tense that my limbs became stiff. My muscles all locked me in place as I stared at his face. It sounds awkward, and it was, but he never once looked over at me. He just stared off into the sea. I started. Your name? Jonah, he replied. And yours? In hindsight, that likely came off as pointlessly aggressive, but he didn't seem to mind. Wait, did I? Wow, I completely skipped over the fact that I said irrelevant. Just completely skip over it. In hindsight, that likely came off as pointlessly aggressive, but he didn't seem to mind. He just kept looking out at the sea. The slight smile on his face made me dislike him, however, and I feel as though, even in his insanity, he was assuming some sort of superiority. I can't really explain why I thought this, but there it is. And granted, given my obviously pathetic nature, he probably wouldn't be wrong, but I expect at least a bit of humility from people who absolutely don't know me. After breathing in the ocean air and letting it loose, he said, "Do you trust him?" "Do I trust who?" "Leviathan." I paused. "I don't know what that means," I replied. Still, he continued, "Do you trust him to show you what's real?" What on earth are you talking about? At this point, I was tired, frustrated, and concerned that this obviously insane person might turn dangerous, so I opted to leave. I stood up and said, "You're insane." "That's possible, but I'm not the only one who dreams. You dream as well, yes?" I sat back down. "Listen, Jonah," I protested. "You're going to have to explain or give me some kind of context. You can't expect me to carry on a conversation with you if you're unwilling to tell me what we're talking about," says the man who won't give his name. "How can I be expected to explain my friend to you if you won't even give me your name?" Wow, he's thinking just like me. "Fair enough. My name's Solomon. Now, who is this Leviathan and why should I know him?" "Everyone knows Leviathan." "I beg to differ," I cut him off. "Everyone knows Leviathan. You just don't know his nature. He's around us right now." With a now palpable lack of sanity oozing like the plague from this person, I asked, "So Leviathan is your god, then?" No, Leviathan isn't a god. He's a friend. I don't know about any sort of god, but Leviathan has kept me safe for decades, and it's worth knowing who is protecting you." "How is this Leviathan person protecting you?" I asked. "Well, you see, I have a problem. Or I have some problems, rather." "Correct." "I have some problems when it comes to knowing what's real." "Shocking." "A lot of things are hidden from me, things that I should not see, and Leviathan, when necessary, unveils them for me. They're the sorts of things that make the world seem less than ideal." I started, "So what you're telling me is that you're so insane that your mind blocks out negative things, and this Leviathan, who isn't real, by the way, shows you what's real. That's quite the story. And that's quite judgmental of you, isn't it?" "Remember when I asked if you dreamed?" "Yes." "Well," he asked, "how do you know that the dreams aren't real?" "I know they're just dreams because I wake up to reality. People go to sleep, they dream. Then they wake up." "How do you not understand this?" "Yes, see? That's just the point. I don't wake up ever." "What do you mean?" When I dream, the transition between reality and the dream world is difficult to pin down. Sailing can often be challenging to describe. Once you cast off, determining what's land and what's void becomes tricky. After he said the words void, I froze for a moment. I have talked about void before, but I imagine his version is different. Anyway, I quickly regained composure and said, "All right, so basically you're hallucinating. Search your companion for something called schizophrenia." "Perhaps, but the real trouble is in deciding which reality is better. Sometimes I feel as though I want to escape to my dreams, to sail Tarshish. I'm never going to be able to say that word, even though I've heard it said. Leviathan's job is to bring me back to the real world," he explained. "It's not a pleasant thing, waking up, but for some reason, Leviathan has convinced me that it's necessary." "Can I meet Leviathan?" "You're in him." "What? You are inside Leviathan? This isn't particularly difficult to understand." I mean, it kind of is when you can't see the thing that you say that you're inside. Where did I leave? I literally just lost my point. Oh, there it is. Okay. Sorry about that. I responded angrily. "Yes, the problem isn't that it's difficult to understand. The problem is that what you're saying is absolutely insane. I understand what it means to be inside of a thing, and I understand that you have concocted some imaginary character for what a normal function of the mind, understanding, isn't the issue anymore. What you're saying is nonsensical. While my problem may prevent me from being able to take your word on the matter, I can say that you have a similar problem, even if you don't know it. Let me ask you, can you describe your dreams to me?" "That really is none of your business," I said. "Of course, but seeing as this is a big island, we are relatively small entities on it, and there aren't exactly a whole lot of people to spread things anymore. Do you really have any reason to keep that information private?" By then, I decided that arguing his sanity was fruitless, so the best course of action was to humor him, if only for the sake of curiosity. I replied, "That's a fair point. I guess I don't. And then I guess you won't mind if I take a stroll through your dreams with you." An awkward sentiment, but I can move past it. The only 2 dreams I can remember from recently are about a woman named Belle. Love interest? Before the second dream, no. After the second dream, I'm not sure. "Explain them to me," he demanded. This is definitely odd. I then proceeded to unfold the dreams that I have already unfolded to you, reader. I explained the horror of the first dream and the melancholy of the recent one. He listened intently, with every measure of interest that I had for his rambling. He never once looked over at me, and he kept tilting his head down to look at the earth. Why did he do that, I wonder? I would say something, some minor detail in the dreams, and he would stare at the dirt with this odd blank expression. Anyway, at the end of it, he did not hesitate to ask a question. "Which do you prefer?" Confused, I replied, "Are you asking which dream of the 2 I would rather have had, or which of them I remember more fondly?" "Both." Honestly, the question took me completely off guard. I'd never thought of my unfortunate dreams in terms of preference. I considered the question for entire minutes, actually. And I was surprised to see that he simply sat in silence, waiting for me to answer. I think he may have had some kind of social anxiety preventing him from looking me in the eye. Anyway, I gave him a conclusion. "I think I prefer the first dream, the nightmare." Ugh, that's a bad one, too. "Why's that?" "Well, after I woke from that dream, reality was a relief. While experience and remembering the dream was and is a horrible thing, I'm actively experiencing the better version of reality. The other dream, the good dream, was one where waking caused tears. It's a place that I don't want to think about because it doesn't exist. And because it doesn't exist, it is a deeply saddening realization that I exist in reality. I would rather have a mundane dream, but if it must fall on an extreme, I would rather it be worse than the real world so as to contrast it, I explained. So, he asked, dreaming of you and Belle together is a terrible thing, yes? In a sense, yes. It's not even the real Belle, it's just a projection. The real Belle, I could never be together, and I doubt she ever even had the slightest interest in me, I explained. Besides, I didn't even know I had an interest in her until the dream happened. If I had asked you before that dream had happened, if you had an interest in Belle, what would you have said? No. I guess your interest isn't real then. You're having some trouble seeing what is and what isn't reality. It was a clever trick, but I wasn't particularly impressed. I responded, is your point only that my dreams affect my reality? I could have told you that. However, unlike you, I know the distinction. I know that my interest in Belle is illusionary, just as I know the effects of my nightmare are also based on something entirely illusionary. My inability to stop myself from responding to said effects does not make me any less aware of what reality actually is. What were the effects of your nightmare? It is the reason I am moving north. It is the reason I left her in the first place, and it is the reason I am talking to you now. I am moving north because the nightmare highlighted something in reality that was a problem, and the best solution was to distance myself from her entirely so as to stop causing said problem. I know that the dream itself wasn't real, and I know that I never had anywhere near as negative an effect on her, but that's not the point. The point is that the nightmare brought elements of reality forward which prompted me the need for change. Damn it. I really hate this thing. Grabbing it is just idiotic. I would agree with you that the effects are based on something illusionary. My only additional point is that everything else is illusionary as well, he said. Ah, I sneered. Nihilism. Too stupid to be anything but trite and just childish enough to be pathetic. Wow, this guy's an asshole. The thing is, Solomon, from what you've described, you have no real basis for assuming Belle never had an interest in you other than her never expressing one. And assuming she had no interest in you, you're doing exactly what you did in your dream. You're projecting. The reality of your dream and the reality of what you call reality are simply two illusionary worlds that you are using in an eternal fight, hoping that the truth will win out. You're biased towards the latter world, however, and thus the former world will never come to fruition. I retorted, you're done talking about Leviathan, sailing the void then, yes? Now we're in the realm of baseless psychoanalysis. Or should I put my philosophy cap on and pretend I am talking to Nietzsche? That is Nietzsche, right? You do know an awful lot about the old world. Where did you learn of the nihilism in Nietzsche? He asked. Do you also know the void? I learned through reading. Reading is useful. You should try it. Also, I know of something that I call void, and I'm not sure if what you call void is the same. Did you have any schooling as a child before the fall? No, actually. My parents decided to let libraries fill the roles of teachers, I replied. Even though my tone was making my aggravation as obvious as possible, he didn't seem deterred. For the first time in the conversation, he turned to look at me. His jaw dropped slightly, and I saw the first genuine emotion on his face. Surprise. After a pause, he turned to the sun and stared again. Did you hear that, Leviathan? He experienced deidetic emptiness as well. I couldn't take it any longer. I hated that he was moving towards feelings of kinship with me. Me and the insane person. Yes. My fists were now petrified, and I raised my voice enough to make my frustrations known to his precious fantasy. There is no Leviathan. After 5 seconds, he said, how do you know? I'm not going to play this ridiculous game with humor me. Please, he said in the only instance of actual severity I've ever heard from him. I know Leviathan isn't real because no one else has ever seen or heard of this entity, an entity whose belly we are supposedly inside of, and to be inside of said entity is physically impossible. That's simply not how the universe works, and most importantly, you're absolutely out of your mind, so your word on the matter is irrelevant, I replied. What if Leviathan has simply not revealed himself to you? What if all the things you just described are actually under his control? And what if I am not as insane as you think? What if everything you think you know is wrong? This is ridiculous, I started. The only things that exist are things based on what I can sense. I can see the world, I can touch the world, and I can sense the world in all the ways that make my certainty valid. It's the sort of certainties that, when lost, make people like you insane. From my senses, I can determine a great many things. Before the fall, we had fields of science and knowledge that make this whole debate pointless and childish. He waited. Then he said, yes, Leviathan does make it difficult to see past your own perspective. He's very good at that. It's funny how you can trick us into claiming a truth that makes others' claims moot, even without any basis. Are you saying that my senses aren't any basis for reality? Are you more insane than I previously thought? Did we not just dismiss nihilism? If my senses are not a basis for reality, are we to regress further? Is the only true basis for certainty that I exist? Do you? Again, this is ridiculous, he asked. Can you give me an argument for why you exist? Well, you had access to libraries just as I did, so you should be able to tell me cogito ergo sum. Yes? I don't even know what that is. It's probably Latin and I probably butchered it. The problem with drawing exists from the existence of thoughts is that you are assuming that existence of thought, he explained. You keep making this even more preposterous. You're escalating into absolute absurd levels of philosophy. I know the word. My tongue is just getting tight. Yet he continued, considering what line of thoughts you would actually have to entertain to agree with Desicrates? Sure. I think, therefore I am, assumes that you think, which you may not agree with, but if you really think about it, you'll determine that you don't know if you're thinking, even if you can't think of a reality in which you are not thinking. It's circular. To assume you think is to assume you exist, and to assume existence is to assume you think. You think because you exist, because you think. I'm not agreeing with any of this, because it's absurd, childish, and stupid. But if you're right, then what? Am I to conclude that nothing exists? Again, how is this not nihilism? No, my dear Solomon, nihilism is simply one step removed from void, and that is a place that exists without certainty. I'm not yet certain that there is no certainty, he replied. Do you not see the problem with being certain that you are not certain? Is this not a logical fallacy of some sort? It is, actually, but I'm simply not sure how to work it out yet. At the present, I cannot justify certainty in any form, and Leviathan is protecting me just enough from void to prevent drowning. I dare not lose certainty entirely until I have something to replace it with. And yes, to your earlier statement, this is absolutely childish. That's precisely what makes it work. Children have a tendency to ask why over and over until the nearest adult screams, because I said so. I thought about it for a minute. And as bizarre as it sounds, I believe I started to understand what he was saying. It's still absurd, of course, but it struck me for some reason. I said, if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that you cannot find an answer to the end of all questions, and thus, therefore, there is nothing to regress to. You can simply keep asking questions. In other words, the lack of dreams is a dream itself, then. Yes! You see, I may be insane, but in a way, you all have the same basic problem I do. Reality, like sanity, is a slippery thing. In a brief moment of arrogance, I assumed that I could immediately solve the issue. I said, should we not simply adopt the position of unknowing, then? If certainty is moot and truth is subjective, do we not all have our own truth? Perhaps your Leviathan is just as true as my lack of one. The trouble with this is that truth must be compatible with itself, or at least I assume as much. I could be wrong, I guess, but Leviathan keeps bringing me back to the assumption. He keeps bringing me back to the assumption that truth has some value as a singular object, he countered. I suppose I agree with that. Anyway, as interesting and frustrating as this discussion has been, I dare say that I don't see the point. At this point, I should note that my frustrations were subsiding. The sun was then almost escaping us, and the slight breeze was doing its best to bring the sea upwards in the form of mist and scent. It was much like being a child, smelling the food from the kitchen as your mother prepared it for you. The whole scene, the contrast between the fire of the sun and the marine depths of the east with a sea of magenta between them, was so staggering that it resulted in me forgetting that I was waiting for a response. We both just sat there. He broke the silence. It's tempting, isn't it? What? Void? There I sat with the only person in the world to have shared void with me. An insane man and his imaginary friend from the deep. It's not exactly the sharing I'd hoped for. I answered his rhetorical question with a correspondingly serious one. Have you ever given in completely? It's where Leviathan found me. Yes, I did expect as much. Void can have this effect on the mind, he continued. I have never fully recovered, of course. I asked. Did you drink the unclean water? Yes. We paused for a moment. Anyway, you didn't answer my question, I said. I asked you what the point of this discussion was. He explained. Certainty can cause a great deal of problems. It's what causes the dwellers to act as they do. It's what causes you to assume Belle never had any feelings for you. And it's what causes you to dismiss entirely because of my admittedly questionable sanity. It acts as a cage. I still think you're insane, but again, if you are correct, what is there to do? How does this help us? I'm not sure yet. I have to find something to replace certainty with. If I can't, then all that's left is the void. There is nowhere now but Leviathan. If these dreams are useful, how are we supposed to present them? Like I said, I'm not sure I exist as a parasite in his intestines, but there is an answer somewhere. Perhaps the old city has it. I'd honestly never understood the obsession with the inland, the old city. Regardless, I felt as though there was no other interesting place for this conversation to go. And night was upon us. It was time to go. Well, Jonah, this has been a fascinating discussion, I will say, even if it was frustrating at the start. It's been refreshing to talk to someone new in the midst of almost no one at all. Good luck on all your endeavors. He said as I stood up, Yes, it has been revealing. But Solomon, you should trust your dreams. Belle might not be who you assume she is. We both share an advantage in our distance from the others. We can see the scale of things. And you best let your dreams work for the better. One giant leap, Solomon. Back to insanity, yes, I responded. I very much doubt that I'm off to find happiness and contentment in the north, and I won't turn back because of a dream. Anyway, goodbye, Jonah. Fair winds on your voyage, he said. I turned and I left him there, sat on his bench with his imaginary character and his pondering. An odd fellow, pretentious, arrogant, and insane. But perhaps genuine. If only his words meant a thing, in the world. Talking to oneself is a sign of insanity. I honestly think that's what's going on here, because for them to have exactly the same upbringing, a very strange upbringing at that, yeah, I think he fragmented, possibly after drinking the water or possibly even before that. But anyways, hopefully you enjoyed my nonsense. If you did, a like, comment, subscribing, and hitting that bell icon would be greatly appreciated. And this has been Boy Lag, signing off.